Have you ever heard the phrase act right? For many black children, those two words weren't just a simple instruction to be polite. They were a survival manual, a code for navigating a world that judged them differently. You'd see white kids running wild in stores, screaming, grabbing everything in sight, throwing tantrums. Their parents might look a little flustered, maybe offer a quick apology, but that was it. No one was calling the police. No one was tailing them down the aisles. No one was thinking those kids represented all white children everywhere. But if you were a black child, doing any of those things was a different story. If you ran, if you raised your voice, if you even touched the wrong thing, the atmosphere would shift. Suddenly, store employees were watching you, their eyes filled with suspicion. Other shoppers would stare, and you'd see your parents' faces tighten with a mixture of fear and anger. When you got home, you knew there would be a reckoning, because as a black child, you couldn't just be a kid in public. You had to act right. That meant being quieter, calmer, more controlled than everyone else. It meant learning from a very young age that the rules were different for you, that a simple mistake could have serious consequences. This wasn't just paranoia, it was a lesson learned from lived experience. Black parents knew what could happen when their children were seen as loud, disrespectful, or out of control. So, they taught them to move through public spaces with a level of self-awareness that other kids never had to develop. Today, we're going to explore what acting right really meant, why the standards were so much stricter for black kids, and what that constant pressure cost them and taught them. Before leaving the house for anywhere public, especially a predominantly white space, the ritual would begin. The talk diet started so early you couldn't even fully grasp the why behind it. Your mother would say, "Act right out there," while adjusting your collar or smoothing your hair. Remember who you are. Don't embarrass this family. Those words were like a prayer, repeated before every trip to the mall, every visit to a new neighborhood, every school event where you knew you'd be one of the only black faces. The words always came with a look serious, almost scared that let you know this was about more than just good manners. It was about something bigger, something dangerous that you could feel in the tension of your mother's voice, even if you couldn't name it yet. Our parents weren't just teaching etiquette. They were teaching survival. They were preparing their children for a world where their every move would be scrutinized, judged more harshly, and punished more severely than the actions of white children doing the exact same thing. This was a preemptive defense against a society that was often quick to see blackness as a threat. The talk was a shield, forged in love and fear, meant to protect their children from a world that wasn't ready to see them as just children. It was a heavy burden to place on small shoulders, but our parents felt they had no other choice. They were instilling a sense of hypervigilance, not to stifle their kids' joy, but in the desperate hope that it would keep them safe. Inside a store, the rules for black children were crystal clear and non-negotiable. Keep your hands behind your back or in your pockets. Don't touch anything unless you ask first. Don't wander off. Stay close, stay quiet, stay still. We learned to navigate stores like they were museums. Look, but don't touch. We learned to speak in whispers, to try and become invisible. It was a skill honed over countless shopping trips, a silent agreement between child and parent. This is how we move through this space. This is how we stay safe. Meanwhile, you'd see other children running free. They grab toys off shelves, open packages, demand things loudly, and even throw massive tantrums when told no. And what happened? Not much. Maybe a tired parent saying, "Put that back," with no real force behind it. Maybe a store employee offering a little smile at their spirit. Their actions were seen as childlike, harmless. But a black child doing the same thing would instantly trigger alarms. Security would magically appear. Employees would start to follow. You could see other shoppers clutch their bags a little tighter. Our parents knew this. They had lived it, and they were desperate to shield their children from that humiliation and suspicion. So they enforced strict, exhausting rules that shouldn't have been necessary. Rules that wouldn't have been necessary if our skin were a different color. This wasn't about raising better behaved children. It was about protecting them from a system that was ready to punish them for simply being children. The double standard was glaringly obvious when it came to emotions. A white child could have a full-blown meltdown in the middle of all five, screaming, crying, throwing themselves on the floor, while their parents might be embarrassed. The response from onlookers was usually one of sympathy or a knowing look of kids will be kids. No one saw that child as a threat. No one called security. But for a black child, crying too loudly or showing too much emotion in public was a risk. It could be seen as aggressive, disruptive, or out of control, even for a toddler. Our parents knew this, so they would quickly quiet a crying child, scoop them up, and often leave the store entirely rather than risk the situation escalating. They knew that a black child's tears could be interpreted as defiance, that comforting their child publicly might draw unwanted attention. Any big display of black emotion in a public space could trigger responses that weren't just judgmental, but potentially dangerous. So, we learned early on to bottle it up, to control our emotions in public, to swallow our tears, to regulate our feelings in a way other kids never had to think about. It wasn't healthy. It robbed us of the freedom to have normal childhood emotional reactions. But it was a protective measure, and in our parents' eyes, protection was the most important thing they could give us. It taught us a level of emotional control that many adults struggle with, but it came at the cost of our own unfiltered expression. This constant need to act right was, in essence, a form of code switching that started in childhood. From a young age, black kids learned there was a public version of themselves and a home version. At home, you could be loud, silly, and free. You could run, jump, and express your full range of emotions without fear. Home was a sanctuary where you could just be a kid. But the moment you stepped out the door, the mask went on. The public version was quiet, reserved, polite, and hyper-aware of their surroundings. This wasn't a conscious choice we made. It was a behavior ingrained in us for our own protection. This constant shifting takes a toll. It's mentally and emotionally exhausting to always be on, to constantly monitor your own behavior and the reactions of those around you. It creates a sense of being perpetually on guard, unable to fully relax in public spaces. But it also teaches you some powerful skills. It teaches you how to read a room in seconds. It teaches you how to navigate different social environments with ease. It teaches you a deep sense of empathy and observation because you've spent your whole life watching, learning, and adapting. You learn to understand unspoken rules and subtle social cues that others miss entirely. While the reasons for learning these skills are rooted in systemic injustice, the skills themselves are a testament to the resilience and adaptability of black people. We learned to play a game with a different set of rules, and in doing so, we developed a unique form of intelligence and strength. The legacy of acting right is complicated. On one hand, it is a painful reminder of the racism that forced black parents to police their own children's joy and freedom. It's a source of frustration, knowing that our childhoods were restricted in ways they never should have been. It's a heavy emotional burden that many of us still carry, that feeling of needing to be perfect, to be a representative, to never make a mistake in public. But on the other hand, it's also a source of incredible strength. It's the foundation of our resilience. The discipline, self-control, and social awareness we were taught became tools that have helped many of us succeed in a world that often sets us up to fail. Those lessons, born of fear, also instilled in us a deep respect for our elders and our community. We understood that our actions reflected not just on ourselves, but on our families and our people. It created a sense of collective responsibility. So, was it fair? Absolutely not. Was it necessary? Our parents believed it was, and it's hard to argue with their desire to protect their children. Today, the conversation is changing. Many black parents are trying to find a balance teaching their children to be aware and safe, but also encouraging them to be free, joyful, and unapologetically themselves. It's a tightrope walk, but it's a necessary one. We honor the sacrifices our parents made and the tough lessons they taught us, while we work to build a world where the next generation of black children won't have to just act right, but can simply be. On public transportation buses, trains, subways, black children learn a specific set of rules. Rules that weren't written down but were taught with urgency by their parents. Sit down and stay seated. Don't be loud. Don't laugh too hard. Don't take up too much space. And above all, don't make white passengers uncomfortable in any way. Black parents were like sentinels, watching their children constantly on public transit, ready to intervene at the slightest hint of behavior that might be deemed inappropriate. Why this hypervigilance? Because they understood the reality of their time, especially during desegregation in the years that followed. On that bus or train, black children were under a microscope. White passengers were often looking, not with curiosity, but for confirmation of their prejudices. One loud black child, one burst of youthful energy could provoke complaints. It could result in the driver stopping the bus and ordering the family off. In the worst cases, it could lead to the police being called. So, black children learned to make themselves small, to shrink, to almost disappear into their seats. They had to be so well behaved that no one could possibly find a reason to complain. Meanwhile, you could see why children being, well, children, They might be rowdy, moving around the aisle, laughing loudly. Nobody saw this as a reflection on all white children or a failure of all white families. It was just kids being kids. But for black children, their individual behavior was never just their own. It was seen as a referendum on their entire race. This double standard was a heavy burden to carry on what should have been a simple ride across town. This pressure to act right didn't stop at the bus stop. It intensified exponentially at school, particularly in integrated schools where black children were suddenly in the minority. It wasn't enough to just be an average student who sometimes forgot their homework, or talked in class, or got distracted staring out the window. That was a luxury they couldn't afford. Black children were expected to be exemplary. They had to be polite, always prepared, quiet, respectful, and completely beyond reproach. Black parents knew that teachers often watched their children differently. The statistics and the stories all pointed to the same truth. Black students were far more likely to be sent to the principal's office for the exact same behavior that got their white classmates just a verbal warning. A mistake from a black child was often seen as a character flaw, a sign of being a problem. A mistake from a white child was just a normal part of growing up, a developmental phase. So, the drilling began at home. Be perfect at school. Don't give them any reason to call you a troublemaker. Raise your hand and wait to be called on, even if white students are just shouting out the answers. And one of the hardest lessons, accept punishments, even when you know you didn't do anything wrong, because fighting back will only make it worse. The goal was to show them you're one of the good ones. Imagine the exhaustion for these children, this constant performance of perfect behavior, this quiet understanding that they couldn't afford to be normal kids, because normal childhood behavior, being messy, being loud, making mistakes would be interpreted through the ugly lens of racist stereotypes. Then there were the white neighborhoods, whether visiting relatives or the few friends who lived there. Black children had to be hyper-aware of how they moved through that space. It was a navigation of invisible tripwires. Don't walk too fast, you might look like you're running from something. But don't walk too slow, either you might look suspicious, like you're up to no good. Don't look at the nice houses too closely. Someone might think you're casing the neighborhood for a robbery. Don't play too loudly in the front yard, because a white neighbor might be disturbed and call the police. Black parents, especially black fathers, often had to give their sons the talk, a series of very specific instructions on how to behave in white neighborhoods. They did this because they knew, from painful experience, that black boys were often seen as threats, even when they were just children playing. The rules were chillingly precise. Keep your hands visible at all times. Don't put your hands in your pockets. If a white person looks at you, smile, but don't stare. If you're stopped by the police or a neighborhood watch person, answer their questions politely and respectfully. And never, ever run, even if you're just playing a game of tag. These instructions might sound paranoid to someone who has never had to live this reality, but they are born from countless real-life incidents where black families experienced their children being followed, questioned, harassed, or worse. In white neighborhoods, for doing nothing more than existing while black, it was a survival guide for navigating a world that viewed them with suspicion. This performance extended to something as simple as going out to eat at a restaurant. Black families often enforced stricter behavioral standards on their children than the white families at neighboring tables. The kids sat properly in their chairs, used perfect table manners, and spoke in quiet voices. They learned to say please and thank you to the servers multiple times. They didn't complain about the food, didn't ask for substitutions, and certainly didn't send anything back, even if the order was completely wrong. And the parents, they often tipped generously, sometimes even when the service was poor, because they were fighting against the pervasive stereotype about black people being bad tippers. They refused to confirm that prejudice, even at their own expense. Throughout the entire meal, they monitored their children's every move, ready to correct any behavior that might be seen as inappropriate or too loud for the space. They were hyper-aware of being watched by the servers, by other diners, by the manager. Black families understood that their very presence at certain restaurants, especially nicer ones, was being evaluated. Were they acting appropriately for this establishment? Were their children well-behaved enough to belong there? This evaluation was never fair, and it wasn't applied equally to white families, but it was the reality. So, black parents taught their children to perform impeccable behavior in restaurants. It wasn't about the behavior itself being inherently important. It was a protective measure, a shield against judgment, and another exhausting performance required just to share a meal in public. Have you ever heard the phrase, "you better act right"? For many black kids, this wasn't just a suggestion. It was a constant, urgent instruction, a core lesson in how to navigate the world. It was about survival. Let's start with church. You'd think that in a black church, there'd be a little more leeway, a little more understanding for a kid just being a kid. But it was often the opposite. Church was where the entire community gathered, and it became a public stage for parenting. If your child misbehaved, it wasn't just a reflection on you. It was a judgment on your entire family's values, your discipline, your very right to call yourselves good parents. So, we sat through long services in uncomfortable Sunday best, without fidgeting. We paid attention to sermons that flew right over our heads. We stood, we sat, we sang on cue, and we were silent when we were supposed to be. And if you slipped up, if you giggled at the wrong time or poked your sibling, the correction was swift and the shame was deep. You hadn't just disappointed your parents, you had embarrassed them in front of everyone. You had let down the community. This idea of acting right extended far beyond the church walls. It was a crucial part of how we were taught to interact with any authority figure: teachers, store managers, police officers, and especially white adults. It was a very specific performance. You had to be unfailingly polite. It was yes, sir, no, ma'am. You made eye contact, but not too much. You didn't want to seem challenging. You answered questions clearly and quickly. You never, ever talked back, not even if the authority figure was completely wrong. Our parents taught this to us as a life-saving skill. They explained, in ways we could understand, that the world wasn't fair. They told us that some people, especially those in power, might already think negative things about us just because of the color of our skin. The best way, the safest way to get through these situations was with perfect behavior. Don't give them a reason. Don't give them any ammunition to use against you. Be so respectful, so compliant, so completely unthreatening that they have no excuse to treat you badly. Think about what a heartbreaking thing that is to teach a child. You're telling them that being right isn't enough. You're telling them that justice doesn't apply equally, and that their safety depends on how well they can manage other people as racism. This constant need to act right in public meant code switching became second nature. We learned to have two different selves. There was the self you could be at home, or with your friends in safe black spaces. That's where you could be loud, expressive, emotional, and fully yourself. Then there was the public self, the one you performed in white spaces or mixed company. For that self, everything was toned down. Your language changed, becoming more proper. Your volume dropped. Your body language became smaller, more contained. Even your facial expressions had to be controlled. We learned not to show too much emotion because an animated face could be misread as aggressive and a passionate response could be labeled as disrespectful. It was exhausting. It's like living with a constant internal monitor, always aware of how you're being perceived. Always seeing yourself through the eyes of people who might be hostile. You're always performing a version of yourself that's designed to make other people feel comfortable. To be non-threatening, it's a psychological weight that you carry everywhere you go. And perhaps the heaviest part of that weight was the burden of representation. We were taught, very explicitly, that our actions didn't just represent us. They represented our family, our neighborhood, our entire race. When you stepped out of line in public, it wasn't just a personal failing. It was seen as confirming a negative stereotype. It gave racists something to point to. It could make life harder for the next black person that came along. Imagine placing that on a child's shoulders, telling them that their every move has collective consequences, that they are an ambassador for their race every time they leave the house. But our parents taught us this because they knew it was true. They had seen how the behavior of one black person was used to make sweeping judgments about all of us in a way that just doesn't happen with white individuals. So we carried that weight. We learned from a young age that we were always being watched, always being judged, and that our behavior mattered in a way that our white friends' behavior simply didn't. The very phrase "act right" was powerful because it was so vague. It wasn't a list of specific rules. It meant doing whatever was necessary to navigate the space you were in safely. This meant we had to become experts at reading rooms and reading people. In one situation, acting right might mean being completely silent and almost invisible. In another, it might mean being politely talkative, but only when spoken to. In some spaces, you made yourself small. In others, you had to be present but perfect. We learned to assess social situations in a split second and adjust our entire being accordingly. On one hand, this taught us incredible skills: situational awareness, social intelligence, adaptability. We learned to navigate complex dynamics with a grace that came from years of practice. But on the other hand, it taught us a damaging lesson that we always had to be the ones to change, to adjust, to contort ourselves to fit the space. It taught us that the space would never adjust to accommodate our full, authentic humanity. The long-term impact of all this is deep and complex. For some, it created a lasting belief that their true, natural self is somehow unacceptable or wrong. It can lead to a lifetime of feeling like you have to perform to be worthy of respect or even just safety. Many Black adults who grew up this way deal with anxiety in public spaces, a constant worry about being judged or making a wrong move. It can lead to a state of hypervigilance where you can never truly relax because you're always on guard. But it's a double-edged sword. Many of us also developed a unique resilience and a set of social skills that have served us well. We carry both the damage and the skills. We carry the trauma of never being allowed to just be asterisk in public. And we carry the competence that came from learning how to survive in a world that wasn't built for us. Even today, in 2025, these lessons are still being passed down. The dangers haven't gone away. Black children are still watched more closely, judged more harshly, and face much more severe consequences for normal childhood behavior. The language might have changed a bit. Maybe nowadays watch yourself out there or remember how you need to move in these spaces. But the core message is identical. Be careful. Control yourself. Protect yourself with your behavior because you can't count on the world to protect you. And this teaching still comes from a place of deep love and legitimate fear for our children's safety. But it is an absolute tragedy that it is still necessary. It is a tragedy that Black parents today are giving their kids the same talk their grandparents got back in 1975. It is a tragedy that Black children still can't just be kids in public without the fear of disproportionate, life-altering consequences. The world has changed in some ways, but in this fundamental way, the freedom for a child to be a normal, imperfect, expressive human being without fear, it hasn't changed nearly enough.